Tene ta tanda lojun la cerdo ten ye pinane ta di capsula dumbare la dumba tela lojun ga labja ta lojun ga labja se du lojun ga capsula kare la labgu ye pate tembare la tene ta te ya lojun ga labja tangbo de ta tanda Nanjuru tamchi cheki chaasi. Nanjuru sinkinte teni tache chitang tingin zain rabo. Teni ta tekindola nyamlin rabo te. Ta kadu kapsula nyamlin si gugare. Tenji kapsula kandi nyamlin si gugare. Tensamchi jalamla kandi. Teni se sawe kapla inaya. Kuwe chambe kapla inaya. Nyalwe kapla inaya. Ro kal ni na ya dub kal na ya thamchi la tene ngaran su ge nyomlin te khande chi go gre se na chi gi chi go re che te khande re se na tene kadu yin na ya se sa kal la yin na ya som pa sang bo da ma tra wa ta chi tang ge sung chu samsung ge yo re la jang chu ge sam se du sen jin thamchi la phen be ko hong che ta 다 간데 있나야 생진 탐지 있나요 로 생진 카히지 있나요 로 드니 두전도 가도 있나요 선바상보 강가라 펜 땅데 그 거홍도 마탈 와제 세주데 라 로중게 다 단다 합자인 베잖아 로중게 합자 당보인 베잖아 남주로 탐지 찍기사 희소.
Among the 7 points of mind training, we have now reached to the 7th, which is called guidelines of mind training. In other words, what to practice. And of these guidelines, the first one is phrased like this: all practice should be done in one way. And practice here includes all kinds. It includes the samadhi training in the meditation state. It also includes how to practice while eating, how to practice while walking, while sitting down, while lying down, and while talking to others, and so forth. In other words, in whatever kind of activity we may be involved in, there is one way to focus on, one way to practice. And in this particular context here of mind training, in other words, training our attitude in that of bodhichitta, it means in benevolence, never parting from the goodwill of wanting to benefit others, whether we are able to bring all sentient beings in as our focus of wanting to benefit, or whether it is just a few sentient beings, the attitude of wanting to help and be of assistance to other beings, we should never part with. While we are eating, we should do so with the attitude of wanting to benefit other beings. While we are lying down, walking, talking, practicing, and so forth, in all different ways, this is the first of the guidelines. All practice should be done in one way.
Tene ta tegendala labja nipa te tene lona tamji chikisa hisungare lona sedu ta tsenche lopanda bo parchi ta jengen ba chunganda bo jela te par neji te tene lona sungi yore la tene te yang ranso ge ta chitang lojong nyamlen che lojong gam Tende chung kapsala, ta lojong kampa kap yina ya rongde tanda nga ranso jerin jiting korwandala nepa yinba cherna kap la tene jipo tang, gabo tang, yapo, jengenpa mepa parchi mepa tende yung sikre re te yina ya kap la jengenpa rabo tene parchi tang mekha ngenpa rabo tang dra tang kanchi la sopa tende yung sikre la tene yung sipa che tang te kendo la ta te che yung de che na nang yung de che na tene nye mongpa hyuk chenpo ye pan rabo tang kap la tene lo jong yung nyamlin che sepa la magawa gam mendeba mutowa tende yungi yore la yungsig re la tende chona tene te la nyembo khandi tengu gre se na tene ta te la khandi se gu gre se na tende ge re so to parchi ta king ngemba ta chi parchi inna yandra nang parchi inna yandra te la tene ta ngarang la dungal chungwa ti taindo tene senkin tamchi la senkin yin la yang dende ga parchi ta ching ba tende yung yo re tene tenzo nyenje tenzu ge dungal te ta ngarang ga taindo pa par hyo som tene lone ta ti parchi ta ching ba tenzo pa tende ge som ba da chen bu chu ge chu su tang na tene ti go ne nyam ne chi go re so.
Second, all correction of wrongs should be done in one way. Correction of wrongs is when things go wrong in our life, when we have adversity of different kinds, which is possible since we are living in samsara and we are still ordinary people, even though from time to time it seems like everything is going smoothly, that we are successful, it is pleasant to live, we have good company, and everything is going fine. That is possible. But then it's also possible that it's not like that. That we have different kinds of problems in our life. There's trouble from other people. We may be involved in dispute. We may be slandered. We may be just having different kinds of the opposite of success, hard times from outside, but it's also possible that it wells up from within oneself, that we get very emotional about different things, that we feel to not practice at all, or we feel uninspired, depressed, or against wanting to do something, which is also a kind of obstacle. At that time, it is important that we identify that, okay, this is a difficulty right now. I'm having a hard time. But so do other sentient beings. It's not just me. So may the hard times that all other sentient beings go through, may that be depleted, or may that disappear for all of them through me undergoing what I'm going through right now. In this way, we can make use of difficulty by training this attitude of wanting all other sentient beings to not suffer when we ourselves have a hard time.
Tene ta tejen la lawsa sumbate la ta zawe no ne kari song yo re se na ton ta ni la jawa ni song yo re la tene te yang aranzu tujundo nyamlen se pe ka so la toma jawa je da tene tamala jawa je de namba ni yo re ta toma la jawa khare yo re se na ta tangbo hyoki ya langbe ka so la tene ngarang ke somotane ta drink ka so la jitang ke kunzo tong tan tong be song chu ke san ni bo de ge ta zawa tong be chu ke ni bo de de re tene drink de da mangala wa je yakbo je samba sang bo tan damba je che ge yin sambe san ke pen hu chenbo je dang gu je la de tong me ja wa tene ta de je so la ni ba de 타면 사와래라 드니 대야 타면 사와데 다 도고마 냐리용 값을라 다 드링기 니무 사와데 조기 와래라 드링기 니무 사와데 조바인 베체는 나랑게 다노 효기 다 드링기 값을라 sombasampoto madrawa chegi somne tham chepate yabu chong duga manduga tene te tardo luji chawa inna yo te dang tamba si endu ngok chawa inna yo te dang tamba si endu sem ke kong inna yo te dang tamba chong undu ta ne tene yabu chong du na tene be gawa gam tene nima takwa te tabu chegi yin sambata se tene ya te dang tene te zingal depanda boji yo na 다 드링 때 생활아 노르도 되니 산이 나니니 된다고 많이 바지 제기 선바다고 그래 대라 통탄이라 자원이지
third point here is 2 activities, one at the beginning and one at the end. And that has to do with how we conduct ourselves on a daily basis. There's something to begin with, and there's something to conclude the day with. The beginning is when we wake up in the morning, the first thought of that day. This is the day begins here. We are opening our eyes, and then we should make up our mind. Here's a new day. Now I will use it in order to focus on this practice, which is not only absolute bodhicitta, but also relative bodhicitta. And I'll try my best to see how I can live in accordance with those principles, in how I behave, in how I speak, and how I keep an attitude towards everything. In other words, in body, speech and mind. And then we go about our daily activities, and then there'll be a time when it's night and we lie down. In other words, that's the end of the daily activities. At that point, there's nothing more we need to do. So then it's time to give ourselves a little inspection. All right, this morning, this very morning, I made up my mind to do something in a particular way. So how did I do? In my physical actions, in my behavior, how well did I actually do? In how I spoke to others, how well did I do with you suffusing that with the bodhisattva principle? And also in my attitude during this day, how successful have I actually been in keeping with the commitment I made this very morning? Well, if we notice that we did quite fine, then we can really rejoice, and then we make an extra thought, which is very well. I'll continue in this same way in the following days as well. But if we notice that we didn't, that we weren't that great, to tell the truth, then we should think, hey, this wasn't such a good way to behave, what I did today. I'll try better in the future. And then we go to sleep in this way. So there's one way to begin the day, and there's one way to conclude the day. And that's what is meant here by this sentence. 2 activities, one at the beginning and one at the end.
Tene ta te yendala labza yibate tene ta te nipo kongjung zeparsa si tsawe no ne songyo ware la tene nipo sedu te la ta ngaran so ge chitang ge lojong nyamlin se ge yore tene tambi chu nyamlin se ge yore la tene ta ni jung ge yore ni karin jung ge se na tene kap ka la ngaran so la debo ta jepo yapo yungre la te da tene ta che de kan de jungre se na ya ka ka la dungan da bo jing yan ban da bo ten de yong se gre ta te la ten ten yo ma re ta chi tang ge jing la ten ne ka la de bo ta jepo yungre ka la dungan da jing yan ba yungre tene ta te la tu jun do kan de yungre se na tene de bo ta jepo so na tene tela chahin shorne yang te si dandoyon tene tela ndepan perwala sobata ta digi jenji tene yang sambanjor te si tene laksam dabota shamninji meba chandwa yung sigre la te yendo yang kapkala dunghal chona dunghal ke ne tene pe nga dubo chongso ne semba pom semba cho ta tende yung yore la te tabo mayong cherto ta ngaranso tene devo ta jibo chona ya te zeto basini te la hidwa ke chahin me basini ngaranso tambi chu nyang so len to ba che ta dunghal chona ya tel pe tene semba phamba ton semba cho la so ba mai par tene te ze ni tene rang nyamling ge zo de ma ji ba ji se ko kre
Next, be patient, whatever happens of the 2. And the 2 here means in the world we live in and how we are, it's not always so sure what's going to happen to us. It's not always pleasant, but it's not necessarily always painful. There's some kind of a alteration. Sometimes things go smoothly, and sometimes they don't. But if it was so, that it would always be pleasant, and we would be successful, and have conducive circumstances, then it is quite likely that we get a little too attached to that, and come to expect that everything is fine. And because of being too fond of having a good time and enjoying ourselves and so forth, it is also quite likely that we forget about caring for other beings, and we get kind of insensitive. In other words, we're not really able to tolerate good times. We get carried away. When the opposite is the case, that we have problems and there's trouble of different kinds, if that was the case, it would be like this all the time. Then often we would just also get caught up in that and be depressed on behalf of ourselves, and worry too much, be saddened, and so forth. In other words, we're not really able to bear that either, to tolerate adversity. So rather than that, the instruction here is be willing to bear, to be patient with whatever happens, whether it's good times or bad times. Have the willingness to carry through those situations. In other words, be patient, whatever happens.
Tene ta tejen la labza ngaba te tanda nipo so dong de la de ne song si song yo la tene ta chitang ge so dong de sung de pe hyo chimbo da ba je go ge ba ta ngaran sun ji tin je khang la kal che hyu da bo de ngaran ge so la ze ge yo re tene jo nor long ji nyam song na yo so ma nyam pa ji chang na ta de la ya 약본다고 써. 또 가르쳐본다고 저게 요래라. 저게 요래 되나야 다 딜레 좀 가르쳐 니 요래. 단단하라서 주념네 집에 가서라. 대배 가르쳐본단 거래. 대니보데 간데레세나 되네 롱도르니 세. 다 담배 추게 냠니 롱도 담배 추게 냠니가 온도세나 디바미게와 빵고 바제다. gewa druk go baje ke chitang ko on tsena chu ge nyam len la ge di londor number ni yore la ti londor number ni bote teni so dong de la ta ngaran so londor ni bote pe ngarang ge tenje dewa topic ge jonda bo yim bicherna teni so dong de ne dik ba bang ta so dong de ne teni gewa druk ba bo chitang ko on tsena teni ne kap misal ko on tsena ta lojong tong galwa tenzo pang hin lojong ke nyamlen tenzo la chamba de la teni pe kal chembo sene ta so le jong ji ban da bo ji si top na pe ya bo re
deux sena ka les
deux so dong deux sena kare se gro so ta ta tini kanden dam ge sena ta ji bo de ta londro ni de dam ge yin se
Next is the fifth. Maintain and guard your vows. Dumba kyong tong song. Maintain and guard your vows. And there's a connotation here in the Tibetan which is higher than you would your own life, which is a pretty strong kind of statement. And because is there anything really that we hold more dear than to stay alive? This is usually not the case. People, they hold on to it as to dear life, so to speak. And this is something which one, if lost, then one doesn't continue. So this is the most precious. And yet, for a practitioner of mind training, there is something which is more precious, and that is the two points, which is what to adopt and what to avoid. And for a practitioner of which is to adopt what is virtuous and to avoid what is unvirtuous, to make sure that we discriminate in the correct way between what is good and what is evil, is actually more important than one's own life, so to speak. So this is why it is mentioned here that protect these two, what should be given up and what should be adopted, even as being more precious as you would your own life.
Tene ta te jesala labja trupatela kawasomla laparsa si song yodela. Tene ta te kawasom senate te kale chempoda yore kawa chempoda yore tela labgure kawasom te kandire sena tangbo chitang nyemo bare nyemo ba tela kawasom te kande yore sena tangbo ngohi par kaware ngarang la nyemo ba chi na yang nyemo ba chi song song ngohi yo mare la nyemo ba te yapu yin nyemo ba te la jing ta te dubon da bo jang da bo yo mare nyom to zain te ba yin be cherna tangpuru ngohi par kawa te la lap ne tene ngohi ba che kore tene nipa te kandire se na nyemo ba ngohi jong par to do kaware ta nyemo ba imbala hi nyemo ba imbala hi ni nyemo bala tene jenjin imbala hi na ya te ko tu yo mare la te pang wala kali yo re la te ko tu yo mare la tene te ko tu ba ta te tu bala zen du shi ni tene parto do par kawala tene parto do par kawala tene sumbade kandere se na jenkia prakaware ta kapkala do thugi yore kapkala do thugi yore de zawani meba se jole te kali yore la teacher na tene te zawani meba se pate dor na tambo ngohi pardo do tama zawani meba se pate ta tisunga te la te kawa yore la tene te kawa te la jang ne tene ngarang tingen zen gam lojong ge chu nyam ne che kunzo to ta dong be song chu ge san nyam ne che ne ta te la te se kawa ji ne kali jab gres.
And the sixth point here is learn the three difficult things. And this is not going to be easy. But still, it is something that as a practitioner of mind training, we should try to first understand and then to train in. And the first of the three difficult things has to do with the negative emotions, attachment, anger, and so forth. And the first thing is that as they arise in our stream of being, in our minds, the difficult thing is to notice that happens, because usually one doesn't. One is not aware that one is being carried away into some pattern, emotional pattern, which is negative. And this is not so simple to be aware of, but even though it's difficult, then one should try one's best again and again when it happens to become aware of what is actually happening, that one is getting angry, one is getting attached, and so forth. In other words, to acknowledge that. And then the second difficult point is when it happens, then to stop getting involved in that emotion. In other words, not being just moving with it, but to hold back and to turn around and not get involved in that same old negative emotion again. And we may be able, as we progress in training in loving kindness and compassion and reducing selfishness and developing bodhichitta, ultimate bodhichitta and relative bodhichitta, it may become more easy. But then comes the third difficult point, which is to totally eliminate the negative emotions. In this way, there are three difficult points. Acknowledging or recognizing the first. Then second is to stop. And the third is to eliminate. So even though this is difficult, as a practitioner, this is something that we should learn and train in.
Tene ta tejen de la tanda la ja dumba de la ju yi zo nom som long si som de la ju yi zo sing de tang ran zo tong bi ju nyam lin xie ba de ya bo lan do ge ju de nom ba som yo re nom ba som de nyam lin xie de la ya bo je to ba xie go re tene ta te ju yi zo tang bo de ge yi ni de ge위히니 야보지요 나트니 주고라 효토바 주념니시 토바 야바 용기요 와라라 데니 데라테니 ge위히니 땡토바세바테 조이조 제지 조이조 님바데 데니 ge위히니 땡나야 ge위히니레 추데 효 추데 념니 야보시 토바 추라 대바도 뭐바 야바데 조이조 님바 Tene juizo sumbate ta tetabu tangbo lamate bardu chu nyams lena ya. Tene tela kapka lang galchin rabo tetsin treba se. Kapka lang tinchin masongwa yung cherna. Tene tinchin tsangwe ke tapsi. Galchin chalwe ke tapsi pate. Ta ti ke juizo nambasomde nyams long na. Tene chu nyamlen yapol yung ke joran rokore.
The seventh point is adopt the three main causes. And of these causes for success in mind training means that if we supply them, then we will progress. So that's why they are important. And the first one of these causes is called a spiritual teacher. Because when we connect with a spiritual teacher, then due to that circumstance, we are able to understand, we are able to know what to practice, we are able to enter the gate of the Dharma, and so forth. Everything can proceed from that point. So that is the first of the three main causes. The second is the interest in the Dharma and the practice of the Dharma. We not only connect with the spiritual teacher, we receive teachings, we understand them, we put them into practice. We have the enthusiasm enough to do so. And then the third is when we don't have the right circumstances for Dharma practice, then we work at providing them. And when they have difficulties for Dharma practice, then we work at removing them, which is the third of the three causes.
Tene ta tegendala labza jepate ta nyamba mepa nomsam gam sin manyamba ji chi go yore tene nyamba mepa nomsam gam sedu tela tene ta te cerdo ta ransoge nyamba mepate ta kondo temba tarto la geihini tengure si sonarela geihini tembe kapsula teni tela mugu manyamba chi gure ta tela mugu sedu tesi ichinda boda teni ti tambi chu de yang ta ba je yimbala teni yang ta ba je yimbe teni tela kubanda boje jine nyamsu lang na chue de nyamlin si tugire la tela mugu de tezam me na tini chue de yapoji nyamsu len tugi yo mare la tichna gewihi ni la mugu ma nyamba je tini teya mugu ma nyamba sedu tini jay kitang ke ngaransu tambi chue go onde se na tini tela mugu chebar jinji yo na nyamlin si topata mugu chebar jinji me na nyamlin si matopanda fo la yang te yang yinji minji tini tige ta zo chu ge teni chu la de pa ta yi chi che pa re ma do yang je chu da men tin be 다 지당 강아랑 라마제 담 라마틴 담 버가슬라 라마티기 추 양나 야보 미히반다보다 라마티기 추다 만틴바체 반다보 근데 라 인지 민지 미살긴 무기지 고야 요 말에데 이나야 당아랑 동보 라마 야보지 담 디게 나오기 추데라 드니 이치지니 나랑 다데 추데 냠니 시고 바이 비잖아 무그만 바제 되네 다 대견들라 이바데 로종라 쪼마냐 바제 로종 감베 갑슬라 당아랑 로종 감 장집그 생감 텐데게 갑슬라 니베 산라 가와다 쪼아침 바제와나 랑킹 그 전주 용거 요라라 티처나 테네 쪼마냐 바제 다제 야포이 데 냠니시 구 삼바타 쪼마냐 바제 테네 다 대답 무바 무그마냐 바도 쪼마냐 바제 예베테네 테네 로종 가 합자 텐솔라야 테네 마냐바 나랑 geogi chu drupata megewi chu pangbala je manyam paji yapo je sin nyam slen to paji se jute teni nyamba me basom.
The eighth point is meditate on or train in the three undiminished things. It has to do with not turning back in regard to the three just mentioned, of which the first one was the spiritual teacher. And what we don't turn about here is a sense of trust. And that of course has to do with the spiritual teacher being for real, like someone who knows his or her stuff and is a reliable person in imparting the teachings. Doesn't mean that if we have met some kind of charlatan or who is acting in contrary to the spiritual principles that we then have to trust that person. Doesn't mean that. But let's say that we have met someone who is actually teaching something which is correct, then we should trust that as being valuable and worthy of applying ourselves to. Because it is a sense of trust that ensures that we can practice. If we don't trust the teaching and the teacher, then how can we carry through with the instruction? So that sense of trust is something to keep, in other words, not letting it dwindle away. Then the second of the three is a sense of enthusiasm, taking delight in the mind training, that taking delight in practicing, in applying these pieces of instructions and understanding the value, and then really being happy to continue. And the third one, somebody called it?
Somebody
is to not turn away from the mind training itself, not forgetting what should be avoided and what should be adopted.
Tene ta tegendole ya labja gobati song yore la labja gobati ya ndalwa me pasum ta den si song la tene tige ta chitang luji go ne gewa sa ba ta me gewa pang ba nga go ne me gewa pang ki gewa drupa yi ji go ne me gewa pang ki gewa drupa te ta ti number sum bo te tu jendo nyamlin ta ma dalwa ji si go gre.
9. Have the three inseparable things. Never separate yourself from three principles, which was in your physical behavior, avoid what is negative, do what is positive. In how you speak, avoid what is negative, do what is positive. And in how you keep your mind, your attitude, avoid what is negative and do what is positive.
Tene ta tegendola labja chubate la chekamba ni ware. 책강바 니보데 율라 초미 더도 종 찹당 빙종 끊라지 세 넘버 2 와라 대나네 당부 율라 초미 더도 종 세드 대 나란속에 다 팔체를 다네 점바감베게 율 니지감베게 율 당 로종 냠슬렘베게 율데 다 추제라 휴침보 예반다고 추제라 대상 매반다고 많이 봐 되니 율 추미라 잠바 있나요 추미 탐지라 쇼리 매바제다 니제 있나요 쇼리 매바제다 되니 대견돌라 로종 감바갑슬라인 강가라 냠린시네 율라 추미 더도 종 다 디지당 그 수리메 바제 탐지 라 차바제 탐지 라 차바제 그 바템 베치도 다 유라 중이 더도 좀다 지금 이바데 찹당 생기데 되니 다 대양 수리메 바데 탐지 라 차바제 되니 탐지 라 차바제 마도 되니 수제 라 예바 수제 라 메바다 마이 찹당 땡니 종와 땡종 생기데 땡니 지바지 나랑그 로이 다 단당아 니제 제게 만두데 있나인달라 니제 강구 레 선반다고지 달라 잠버게 산 제게 만두데 달라 잠버산 제고 레 선반다고지 더 진진데 나랑그 빵구레 섬그 만두데 있나 더 진진데 빵구레세 섬네 루주만다고지 마인파 뭐네 다 나랑그 베솔라 때네 렘지 땡니 샘지 땡니 대답을 지바제 드니 두단 넘버건도 지바레스 대답을 주바.
The 10th has two sentences. One is train impartially in all areas, and the next is pervasively and especially. Sorry. It is important to train pervasively and deeply. That is the second part. I don't know, you have that sentence? No. Okay. And to be impartial has to do with how we train in loving kindness and in being compassionate to others, that we don't discriminate so much as to who deserves to our love and who deserves our compassion, so that we are more focusing in on that group of sentient beings and not so much on another. In other words, we make difference between who to be kind and have compassion for. That we should try to expand that to be impartial in all areas of practice, so we don't limit our heart in any way. And the second part of the sentence, so that it becomes pervasive. In other words, throughout all areas of our training, that there is no more any barrier or limitation anywhere between how we regard other sentient being, but totally open to embrace everyone. And then deeply, it means that we look not only outside towards the objects, but also inside in our own hearts and minds, to see whenever it feels difficult to be loving, to be kind, then we work especially at that part where we have feel some inner barrier towards someone, to overcome that. And also when we feel like holding back in our compassion for someone, then work particularly at that. That is extremely important.
Tene ta te la labza juba te labza juba ta labza juji ba te kolwa non la ta gam si suma de la kolwa nam la si de tene ta te ya kolwa si de che som si go panda bo che la ko yo re tene ta 대양 로종 시베 kapsula jitang ke samba sampo te senchin kangala si go ge yore re la te le te si kawa te kandere se na ta samba sampo si kawe ge yore te la kol ne kolwa nam la sunde tene ngarang la te si ngarang dangbo sinking down da wajela ina chitang senking thamji la somba sambo se bala te kale yo marete ina ngarang dangbo sinking daw tela tene somba sambo se bala kale yo re la te yendola che ne pa chamking da tene lo drup si sena pa ya po sena sur dubu sinking tin sola tene che somba sambo se bala te kale yo re la junsin teacher na dangbo 나랑게 되네 텐솔라 믹살게 베지 검나 되네 디게 펜바침보 용료라라 되네 클라스 주지바데 다텔라 검쿠리.
The 11th point, especially practice mind training on those things which are hardest to practice. Hardest means when it doesn't come so easily, then that is the time to put more energy into it. And that we can feel when we have an enemy, someone like an opponent who opposes us in different ways. When we try to do something, it is slightly harder to feel love and compassion for that kind of person. Also, when someone tries to hurt us, hurt our feelings or harm us in different ways, that is something to try extra to be loving and kind to that kind of person. Or there's a third kind of, which is those who show us ingratitude. We have been kind to them, but then they turn against us, or they are ungrateful. And so for those kind of people in particular, there is some areas that one could work especially on, not only for that which comes easily, for the people we already love, but especially for those for whom it's difficult to have good feelings. Those are the ones to train with.
Tene ta tegendala labza juni ba de zawe ge le jin yin da la du me za se tene tanda ne ka ge jin la du ni tangaran so lo jong dong chamba dang hi je gong ba kap la tene ngara jipo ye ba ta gawo ye ba kap la je samba zang bo ye de ba chamba ye de ba cham hi je yong ye de ba da bo yung ge wa re la ka ye kap ka la yung se ge la tene kap ka la yang ngal chin jipo me ba da bo ta tene ne pa sin kin ye ba da bo ta sa wa long man do wa dong na li ye ba ka so la tene samba yong la so da bo samba gam ma to ba ni je gam ma to ba tene ta tinde kap ka la yung ge wa re la tene teacher na data ba mai ba Koran kadu yinaya jambatan hinje ta changchu ge san de be kal chimbo sin gam to patela jin yin da la tu me ja.
12th, do not depend upon external conditions. The idea of being dependent upon external conditions means that when things are nice and we have good health and there's no problem with anyone and so forth, then it feels that we can be nice people and have love and compassion for others. But then when we have a problem, when with someone, or it is circumstances are not very nice, then we feel it's difficult to be loving and kind. In other words, we are dependent upon circumstances. We should try to overcome that dependency so that we can train in every kind of situation.
Tene ta tegendala labza chusam pati tarizo nyomslong songrela tene ta tanda tari ta tanda ngaran lo jong gam ka sala zo te ta jetang ge tu pa se pa tong som pa se pa tong gam pa se pa la so pa ye pe na ni tanda ngni dwa lang ni se jute nyomslang ya te kal chewa se ko gre.
At this time, practice what is most important. And that means simply that in the context of mind training, not only to understand these points, but to apply them.
Tene ta tegendala labja chuje pati kolo ma sa sinkinda buje kolo sena sinchi lo pa da buje la pe na ngaran so ni je gamba ta tene tegendala zeba gamba la so pa ta tene tepa to mugu je pala so pata ji na tepa jesa la tepa ma je pa tepa mi ji bi si la tepa ji tepa da bota ni ji ya tene chitang je migyo wa ta sen nye mo ba ji na ni ji mi ji ba tene tepa to je chu la ju pa ge te chu ji cher to la ka wa je pa la ni ji je pa la so pata te ta ji na te ji ni ji ko lo ta tepa ko lo im chi na te ta ko lo po mo sa ko lo ma sa.
14th, do not be mistaken. In our practice, where we are trying to develop the qualities of trust, devotion, and kindness and compassion, it is possible to be mistaken, to place our trust in that which is not trustworthy, or to feel sorry for people who are undertaking hardship in order to practice the Dhamma, rather than feeling sorry for people who are confused and get emotionally carried away. Then when somebody suffers because of undertaking Dhamma practice, that is not someone to feel sorry for. So that would be mistaken compassion. We should take care not to be mistaken in that way.
Tene ta tegen da la labja jonga pati rinju maza segre la tene rinju se du kap ka la ngaran chu nyamle ya pose ba kap ka la mezi ba tene ta te kap ka la chamba ye ba kap ka la chamba me ba da kap ka la ni je ye ba ni kap ka la ni je me ba da tene te ya chitang ka kap ka la se na ya po re te ina ya tu jondu narmar se na ya kompel ton ro wa im na tene rinju maza.
Next point, do not fluctuate. It means don't be sporadic in how we practice. Sometimes practice, sometimes not. Sometimes be kind, then be unkind. Compassionate, then uncompassionate and uncaring. Of course, it's good when we do practice, but it would be better if we have some sense of constancy, because it's through constancy in practice that we can progress. So therefore, do not fluctuate.
Tene ta te la te yendo tanda labza judu pa te dorche jang singe dorche sena tene be homba che sam se panda bo ba che sam se ba tene ngarang che si tugre sam panda bo tene chu nyamne ta nga tu mare somne bo ba hyom de ba mai ba tene nga te tingi nyamlin si gogre nyamlin si tugre sambata popa te si ki na ti ge nyamlin yapo si taba yin bechena dorche to jang.
The 16th, train wholeheartedly. It's in the sense of not being timid, where one is kind of shying away from practice, thinking this is like too big a jump for me to get into. But wholeheartedly is in a sense of being gutsy, being brave and taking the step. That kind of bravery is necessary. Like, I can do this. Even we haven't been able to succeed yet, but still having that kind of gutsy attitude is important.
Tene ta te yendal halse chudin pa te tochi ni ji tharwar sha sam yo la tochi ni ji tharwar sha se du tene ta kap ka la ngaran de se de pe ka la o ngaran pe tanda ta te chi ngaran da jin jin chung du song re ngala da jin jin te som yo ma re song sam da bo ta tene ngaran la cham ni je ya bo yo re ta nga ye cham ni je ya bo yo re sam ba da bo tende hong se ge la tende cham ni ji jiao yong ge yo re cham ni ji jiao ye ba da jin jin me ba da bo yong ge re te yin na ngun ni ta ni ri en du ta ni tang bo tene ya jin da bo the du kan de re gen du ya bo ta ni tene jin da the jo ni ta nga ya bo re ge du ga sam ba da bo jin da the ni jian men du na ta ya bo re ge du ta do te ya bo se gu re sam ba da bo je da jin da the na te si du gon da bo re ge du na ta nga ta do yo te si zen du ji gu re sam ba da bo tende la to ji ni ji thar war sha tang bo ngarang ge je ya bo chung song sam ba yo re de te la ta ji ya bo se ne yang jar to tene re bo ya bo to par si ko.
17th, free yourself through examining. And This has to do with when we have practiced and then we, at some point, we get the feeling that practice is going quite well. I'm succeeding in I'm not so selfish anymore, and also I feel more kind, more compassionate and caring, and so forth. And this may quite well be true, but it doesn't mean that we should just rest on our laurels, so to speak, and think that now everything is fine. We should put it to the test to see whether or not it is really true, or whether it's just an impression we have. And the easiest time or the time it becomes most evident is that when we are in a tight spot, in a difficult situation, because then we can actually see how our reaction is, whether it is one of immediately latching out with selfishness, or responding with kindness and compassion. And once we are in a tight spot, then we can just observe ourselves. How are we reacting? And if we behave very nicely there when it's difficult, then okay. Then we can agree, yes, I have really progressed here. And if we haven't, then we will say, oh well, it was just an impression I had. Now I need to try harder and continue the training.
Tate Jodin Patan, Tene Tegendala, Jobji Pate, Yumagam Sungayorella, Tene Yugam Sinkete, Tangaranso, Chambatan, Nijigo Ni, Jay, Lalin Tarwa, Ta Chu Nyamlin Chepa, Tela, Jay, Yu. Sena Tatela me parable ngarang pa paint out tela chur paint out go re sombe rewanda bo chimbo je yo na tela you gum sigrala tening ngarang ki tanda chamba tan hije gum ni yendan sepate pala paint out ni churla lensi pichitola paint chamba tan hije gum ni paint out ba mai par nguni chamba tan hije ki pa mela paint out to ba je go ba im picherna teni te ta bu you gum na te si teni chamba tan hije tela ya jen yo jitang 근데 약보래디 이나야 tel라 정말 약보지 정요 말이라 junsin teacher na yumagam.
18th, do not expect appreciation. And that has to do with how we practice. We're trying to be nice to others. We're being kind, we're being considerate and caring. And then we think, well, now I deserve to be treated nicely in return. By them, and this is not really the clean way of practicing. Of course, it's nice to be kind and trying to help others, but not if it is just to get something in return for me. So therefore, do not expect appreciation.
Tene ta tegendal haza chugupate kolomadam sungiwarela kolon dam sena tene ngarang la jay parupoti nepachi chung kapsula tene langsung titen to yedaji tene tate tabuji ungrela tate chitang ngarang su nesurel yinaya tela ngarang su tambi chu nyamni sepala tene nepachi chung na ya tela yedang mijewaji Titaini, Sanjitaini, Zabagam Tupa Jason, Tinite Colum Daba in Picherna, Tini Chusiapa de Tatanda, Niemo, Niembonroaji Gupa in Picherna, Teta, Coloma Dampaji.
Next, do not be irritable. Does it say sensitive or insensitive?
Sensitive.
Mm-hmm. Do not be sensitive? Okay, maybe overly sensitive, maybe something like that. Because it is it's a trait of human nature to be irritated when something annoying happens, of course. But for a practitioner of mind training, we should try not to always react with anger when there's some kind of irritation happening, and instead trying to get to the point where we not immediately react with anger. That's important.
Tene ta tegendal haja ni chutamba te yi chamba maza so la yi chamba se na te si semba te tu tung tung da ya ka ka la pe te sa ji ke semba gan ro anda bota ka ka la ya te sa ji ke semba magawa ro anda bota tende ma yin pa tene ga na ya ga nam jur long song ten ya ken da bota maga na ya maga nam jur thal da ten yum ken da bo ma yin pa tene je tu jun do tembo da bo so atela yi chamba maza.
The next, do not be hysterical. It's in this the opposite of being level-headed. In other words, very fickle-minded. When you're happy, immediately you get overjoyed and by so little. Or if there's something that goes wrong, immediately getting depressed and unhappy. But train in being more level in whatever happens.
Tene ta tegen de labzani ki tsachi bati worche mande so yore la worche se na ta tuji che sinkin da boda be tela tene ta be garden che sinkin da boda ta tinde ke chenyim bon da bo yung sampe ke rewa che bati tinde da bo je chang na tela worche mande se ta tela kondo yu magam sinkide kamdana la worche mande sinkide tini palcher jigbanda boji yorela yu magam sena tang harange pa yapoje sena ti lendo churje yapoje si sombre wata bota worche mande sinkide ngarange pa yapoje sena senyimbo ndabo tujiche sinkinde boji la yu sambanda bo keche nyimbo ndabo kasakala tati medi yapondo sinkinde bo la yu sambanda bo tati ndege rewanda boji sena tini chitang chepre yo marete ina ya ta ngarange tela rewaji japsadu tini ngarange losam namda de changma je rang chong yo mare la teacher na losam namda de changma je yung gi chetla worche mande sinkinde.
The last, the 21st, is do not expect thanks. And in other words, it's hoping that we may be spoken to with gratitude and spoken of nicely by others. It may sound a little bit the same as do not expect appreciation. And in some way they're similar. One is to be treated nicely in return, hoping for that by what we do, that our reason to be kind and caring is that we will be treated nicely back. Well, here it is more being hoping to be spoken of nicely, so it's more in a verbal way. But it's also the last one, do not expect thanks in return.
Tene tatini tanka ni kisaji ndaboji song yore tanka ni kisaji ndaboji song yore te yinaya ti zo de kandere sena kanga somba namda sejujela te somba sangbo number tabaji sejujela ni kisaji di chasang tenda ndabote tere tere la tene tela kapkala ti si jendabo yonwa tela zabzab che goba yimbe cherna tanda worche mande sinkin raboda yumagam sinkin raboda kolom madam sinkin raboda zo de kandere sena losan nanda seju je re te ina ya tela kapkala chunchun tela ta teda chen ayo na song san raboji na te maji na yapo re sewa nangi ta tige te se losan number taba tela chen matang wa je losan number taba te zangma je zoya ka tanda la niksaji te suma re tanda ga onda sena te niksaji te tanda je ra.
In this way we have 21 points here, but they're all about one and the same principle, which is a good heart, good intention, and noble resolve. And the reason why there are 21 is because sometimes our good heart may not be a little kind of rusty or a little bit in need of a cleanup in different situations, because sometimes we think, well, that actually doesn't matter, I'll just do it anyway. Well, in fact, it does matter. So that is the reason why they're mentioning 21 different points here, so that when we can see that in different situations that don't be hysterical, don't be irritable, don't fluctuate, don't expect thanks, and like that. So in those areas as well, we need to improve a bit so that our good heart can be really clean and pure.
Tene ta taken the la ta tanda ti yu tana la ta ti tige ten de lo jung ten de somare la. Tene ta ti yu tana la kandi yore se na lo jung ten de me pesha ti pe yabu yin be jun sin da. Dongwa de pe pento yabu ye be jun sin ti song yore la. Tene te ya zao no ne song na nima nga bo doande se ta te nima nga se du ngaran so ta namba sanji be chulu la song ne tanda tu nima se ta tu si dubu nda bo je ke kap la tene ta te la nima nga nda bo nye mo ba ta me kanga la nye mo ba mambo ye ba se tung tung ye ba tene me kanga je hika sangboran me ba nda bo tene tawa tang chuntayo yabo me ba nda bo ta tende ke rek te la nima nga sungi yore la ta tanda tene huma kalpa sangbu ke kap nda bo je mahin ba ta nima nga bo doa ti nima mangbo ye ba dubo ye ba tusi dubo ye ba kap ndana la tene ngaran so che dungal ta tene te yang na dungal junga ta yang na la tene ta nye mo ba hiu cherun do anda boda tene mgewa mangdon do la so ba tene ngaran su chu do menten bal do ma hin ba nima ngabo te pa yapo che jorni chonchu long de jorwa yin lo jong ga tan den de yapo che nyamlin chi thup na tene nima nga yo na yo ta kora nima nga yo re te yina nima nga te tene yapo chi ni chonchu long de ngarang ge tene tambe chu drup ge tinchi tene kunzo to tan tambe chonchu ge san kam be tinchi nda bola jorwa yin ta ti ge lo jong tan de ma te tene si tu yo re tene junsin teacher na mengo anda dutsen da bojire dutsen sena ta pe ni kanga chu ndong kin da boda dunghal hiwe ge dutsen da boda tende sungi yore la dutsen gi nimbo de yahyu da bonda dangwan da ta tan tu ne tempare la da kani chungwa de sena jo selling pa de jipa yin so jo selling pa de chitang la ma che par chin be chena dangwa de ni yapo yin be junsin da bojire tempare.
This concludes the 7 points of mind training, and there are some extra verses here at the end, which I like to explain the goodness, the value of these teachings. First, when the 5 dark ages occur, and these 5 dark ages, which means the time of the Buddha's teachings at present is characterized by 5 kinds of degeneration in the negative emotions, in lifespan, in personality of people, in their worldviews, and so forth. In other words, there's a lot of negativity going on in the time in which we live. And yet, even though this is true, the 5 degenerations are rampant, still it is possible to train on the path to enlightenment. During this time, it is still possible to turn them into the path of enlightenment. And through these instructions of mind training, which are like the nectar of immortality, the Amrita, which can make negativity subside, which can quench thirst, and so forth. These instructions are like such a precious nectar. And where do they come from? They are handed down through the lineage from Suvarna Dvipa, meaning the master from Sumatra, from the Golden Continent.
Tene ta te yendola chitang dangwa te yapu yimba ta dangwa yapu yimba te ya ta khong ki nyamlin se ni khong la dreven da bo yapu chong ni Tene Tegendala, Naranzo Lomatamji, Tetar to Yamnichin, Yapuyung Resin is on a day, Jetang Takori, Tene. Tat lojong kola rang muba mon ju se koran lojong la tepe pepa ta muba hiwo yapoji chongare sanche ka wa hidoji konla chong sungare la te ya tene tepa ta muba yapoji chongate junsen kande jire se na tene nganjong lejin trosi bisi ta jiwa ngamala te si jangba yapa ta lentro yapa la tene lojong la pe gabo yapa je chong injire ta kongrik songa de la kongrik jitang juchin pusum sopan rabo je chong ni kongrik jitang muba yapo yapa je chonga de la muba yapo je chong ni tene kongge lojong ka dangwa tenzu hubare dangwa tenzu hyu kapsala kongla tesi parchin rabo ta jengen pa sunga re te yinna yung dunghal tong tangin tenzu chi to se ne tene dancing dolu ke ta lojong ka dangwa te hyu pare lojong ka dangwa te kare re se na dancing dolu ke dangwa yin pe chen na kong ka dangwa te hyu pa yin tene tandan delu yung te tabu ten yo re tene dangwa te hyu ni penpa kare chong se na ta ni he yung menje to 다 ngarampe dangwa yapo te top ne tene khongri ke thup ke dain la dain da boji top yo re la ta ngarang hena ya pe khang ya jang ma re ngarang dangwa sapo te top dangwa sapo te nyamlin che ju chong song gon ne pe thu la gawa ta to ya pa tin de ba re la thu la gawa ta to ya pa te tin ni ta khongri kalwa sambu yin ban da boji dangwa te top te kalwa sambu yin ban da boji tin ne tini maung palayan dige karitengi yore se na lomatsu ke nyamni yapu se kore ndala nyamni se kore cheransu nyamni se na ya hina yung menje pa ke dainji yung re sauni tini dangwa dige chewandawa sungre.
So this verse demonstrates the greatness of such an instruction, and for us to understand, the author here, Cha Chekawa Yeshidoji, he gives another verse which explains something about how he himself went about to receive the teaching and what happened to him. He says that it must be due to my former training, the continued meaning in life before this, that it somehow was awakened so that I could have a lot of trust and sincerity in such a teaching, because I disregarded any kind of hardship involved in receiving it. And he must have gone through a lot of suffering and difficulty. Also, he said he disregarded slander, being disparaged by others, but still he managed to receive, and not only receive, but obviously he also practiced these teachings on mind training, the oral instructions on taming ego fixation, meaning the clinging to a personal identity, to herself. So what happened? He gained some kind of confidence, and ease and peace of mind, to such an extent that the last sentence he says, "Now, even at death, I will have no regrets." In other words, even when the time of death comes, he has nothing to fear. He's completely confident, and totally has peace of mind. But implicitly with that is also an injunction to the reader and to future disciples of this and practitioners of mind training, that if you also disregard any kind of difficulty and receive this teaching and undergo the training, then you as well will gain confidence and fearlessness even at the time of death.
Tene ta tige tanda lojong tende mate chuparela tene tanda lojong tende mate tari hyoju chungala ngara pe gabuchong jitang ta nanira longmala shaja chempo mangbo hyubare tenka hyubare tene te hyu kapsala ganga pe gabonrabu na te nyamne na ngune te hyeba te tene je 대매 반다고 많이 봐. 너네가 냠내나 뭐봤나 티페 가보 정송아. 대 대견들라 내가 간 탈지 찡냥 반다보다 된대 정나야. 야 갑가라 드네 로종 그 당하게 배 펜토 침 반다고. 용나 som네 달로 로종 된데마데 휴주 som모 땅송아. 대다리 차상 바치 매봐. 휴 나라야 배 깔와상 부정 제nom바야 가와지 네 토림보니 라라페 라라다 라란수스 레가 요네 제 추어라 뭐바침보 나네 되니 제 로종 그냥네 세두 되니 나랑 제 다가세 제 펜토 매바가 자베초베지 히나 되니 된텔라 데운다고 용거 말해라 되니 디처나 단다 로종티 휴네 제 뭐니 마음발라 저런 남베게 담배 주념린라 팽그레 선반다고 제 세두 나라야 대효지 중앙라 깔바상고 정송마 제 넘반대로 너를 패네 주니 되니 주니니 냠린세 되니 된솔 빼 나라 빼 가고 정만이 답안에 두지지요.
We have now completed the teachings on the 7 points of mind training, and I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to impart these instructions here to all of you. In the 4 years before this, a lot of Mahamudra teachings were given, several years in a row, which was excellent, and I deeply appreciate the amount of sincerity and diligence you put in practicing wholeheartedly. Also this time around, I had the hopes to be able to give a teaching like this, which is very useful when it comes to dealing with the more temporary difficulties and obstacles on the path and so forth. So this time around we've been able to cover these teachings in full without any interferences or bumps in the sequences. It went very well. And also many of you have come from quite far away and not necessarily with that much ease. It may have involved a lot of expense. It may have involved having to set aside your duties, your obligations for your work and so forth, which is something very precious, and I really appreciate that kind of sincerity. So thank you very much.
Tene tanda ngarang ki hyojije la jitang ngarang humane ta je lomacho kahi tanga je 대신 섬지되네 영린지시나 가능 강아지 그랬어요. 다 나랑은 현다 가야요 말에 저랑 반나로 되는 거잖아. 야보래 저들 대신 마대완다고 아까 당할 텐데 로바시 도구만 두서 받다고 정송나. 되게 대라제 참 대산다고 제 사차제 정나라 상백에 생그때네 로망부 공라 정송 이나야 되네 가야 정마송 되네 지마 custom tezi sajanda boje etop tiare la te talote top yaponda bo jongsong la te karere se na loma soje kahi lo song ge nyamne nangde yo na yanda kahi yen tuntu nyamne nangde yo na yanda te sa emba da sa yapo da ta tinde yo de tenala tene dukha je wo na be loma so chu nyamne nang sala be pen topa 홍사레 되네 테나라 다제 추그 땡진다고 게긴다보다 라만다보 요나야 나랑게 갑갈라 추 히나야 되네 로마츠고 추 장나야 되네 참 데나야 데세 팽본다보 용사레 같은데 som바다보 정송라 되네 데세도 마음발란 참 용긴다보 요나야 되네 참 유로나 효게야나 데 대견도는 성공야 임베갈라 데세 로바나 tumkin다보다 된델 뭐바 용긴요나야 된소라 로람 데지 나나 배 강강하란수 주념는 남게라 배 벤토체 봉사래 된대죠.
There's one additional thing I would like to mention, which is over the years, many of my students and disciples, they have expressed the wish to do some more intensive practice in retreat. And up until now, all I have been able to say is very good. Please go and do that in your own place. But I haven't really been able to provide kind of special facilities for that. But it has still been on my mind over the years to have some kind of place where people could come and practice, maybe for 3 years, but if not, it may be shorter time, a couple of months or even 1 month or some weeks. And until recently, that has not been hasn't happened. But now it seems about to change. There is a place called Crestone in the southern part of Colorado, where land has been obtained. Yeah, and that seems to be quite a good place for retreat and also for retreat cabins. So this is in the process of taking place right now. So therefore, those of you who have the interest in the future to do retreats, you can aim your minds at that place. Would be good to go there and do retreat practice. Also, if you can find it in yourself to help that happen, it would be excellent, both for yourself and for others. And also it will be a place where I expect to come and teach. It will be a place where other teachers will come and many different kinds of practitioners will come and use this place. So if you can help make it happen, then I'll be very happy for that. So please keep that in mind.
Tene ta tanda ngarange lojun tende ma hubala hijugo kokap chonla tuji chiho yama den piji sangarang tereng ngwa dom manondengi.
So last, I'd like to thank again for this opportunity to give the instructions on the 7 points of mind training. And now to conclude, let's dedicate the merit. Om